this is a thing where you may have done a series. Say you did a series or you did a pilot. Now, the week of the upfronts, you get a call from Fox, NBC. Hey, will so-and-so be available to be in New York on Monday? Okay. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to get picked up, right? You think you're going to get picked up. And they don't give a shit whether they, okay, it doesn't matter. They don't care whether they have to pay a first class ticket and a hotel room because it's their series, it's for the advertisers or whatever the case may be. And they're making this big announcement. So it doesn't matter to them whether they buy a first class ticket on Sunday. Okay, they're not looking to get a deal on a ticket and book it in advance. Well, you know how the actor knows that they didn't get picked up? They don't get a phone call on Sunday to say, here's your ticket. Okay, nobody calls you. They don't tell you anymore. No news is bad news.
This is Coop's Comedy Corner. Buckle up because it's funny as Coop's Comedy Corner.
Welcome to Coop's Comedy Corner. I'm your host, Steve Cooper. And I got to tell you something, people. I've been away for 2 weeks. I haven't recorded, but I'm coming back with a great guest. And in the next few weeks, I have some amazing guests. I have my friend Steve Mazon on next week, who's in a movie called Dying to Do Letterman. It was about his battle for cancer and how he ended up getting on the David Letterman show. Then we have Sue Kalinsky, who's an amazing writer, amazing comic. And finally, we have Joey Cola. But tonight, my guest is a gentleman who I've never met. Actually, I've sent him a few emails getting Julia Scotti on my show in Pensacola. And then tomorrow I have Buddy Fitzpatrick and Joey Callahan. So I don't know him. I've never met him, but I know his name. And everyone, if you ever did comedy in the East Coast, knows of Omnipop. And my guest is Tom Ingegno. How you doing, Tom?
Pretty good, Steve. How are you?
Good. I got to ask you, how did you, I have to start off, well, first of all, what people want to know. You're a management. Tell people what the difference between an agent and a manager is besides 10% and 15%.
Well, I always like to use a friend of mine, actually, somebody Bruce Smith. He always used to use this analogy and this joke is that your manager will tell you what color tie to wear, and your agent will tell you your manager has poor taste in ties. Okay, so feel free to use that. But there are companies that take 10 or 15%. Managers can take whatever they want. There's no regulations on that. We don't happen to take the 15. Agencies take 10%. The difference is, I think in my case, because we switched over, we were an agency for many, many years. And then we had switched over to management. And basically the two companies were under one umbrella, which is Omnipop. But I guess you'd say that both coasts are autonomous of one another. They do their thing. I do my thing. But I think it depends. A manager it depends on how you look after your client. Managers can choose the clients they want to work with. And in many cases, agencies acquire, acts, not specifically just comics, but acquire acts. And then the agents are told to do what they have to do for those acts. And in the case of management, we get to pick and choose the people that we want to work with. And I think that's an important thing because you're very connected to them, where there's not always the same kind of connection with the agent because they're distant, and in some companies, there's several of them. So you don't really get a chance to really know anyone in particular, maybe one or two. But, the manager is like, it's a relationship that you're in it together regardless. And, the fight is yours. So I like to think that my people and myself we're just as one. If they get a rejection, they get hurt, I get hurt. Somebody hurts them, I get mad. I don't think, look, agents are needed, okay, because they open up different doors and they have different avenues to pursue. And managers have different relationships with people and they pursue things differently. In some cases, the manager you can call the manager the assistant. You can call the manager many things, but hopefully you don't say any bad things about your manager, otherwise you shouldn't have them. Okay, so But the manager, a lot of times people don't think that the manager is completely in control. And in many cases, I've always realized this, that in theory, the theory of it, I actually work for the client because they pay me. Okay. If they were working for me, I'd be paying them, And so in this case, a lot of times you have to remember as a manager that you're working for the client. And they're still the boss. Now they're hired you for advice and advice on things and for your expertise in certain fields and for your ability to take care of things so that they can just work on their craft. So that's what I kind of think a manager really does, and then we sort of coordinate everything. If we do have an agent, I coordinate with the agent. But if it is very difficult today to get agents because agents don't specifically build people like they used to. Okay, they don't build them. They want you coming in, full on. If you had a series regular role on a TV show, a sitcom, or any kind of procedural, or anything like that, I can get an agent tomorrow because they want that 10%.
It's funny. It's funny you say about agents, and you're right, because a friend of mine, Xander Berkeley, who's been in a bunch of stuff, and he was in Fear of the Walking Dead. And after that, he decided he didn't want to do any episodics because he wanted to raise his family. And his agent for years said, okay, bye-bye, because they're just thinking, as you said, I always think it this way. When we talk about managers and agents, I think the manager is someone you find a seed and you plant it and you cultivate it and you nurture it and you grow this beautiful flower, and then the agent is this person who's like the nursery who comes and tries to sell that flower. I think I've always thought that agents, I always heard about your with Omnipop is you really cultivate your acts. I mean, that's why your clients have been with you forever. I mean, it says a testament to you that your clients have been with you for so long.
Yeah, I'm proud of that factor, but it's also, in terms of management, especially on the East Coast, I know my limits. Because I like to be hands-on. So I don't, all the stuff that is done, I do. And I prefer to do it that way. And that's why my clients, trust me, or they want me to handle it because they know I'm doing it for them. And as I said, you want to give them the opportunity, to take things off their plate that they're, trying to take care of everything and just worry about their craft, whether it's the actors that I represent or whether it's the comics that I represent. I want them to be able to have the time to do what they do and work on that craft specifically. It's a little bit more, we do handle comics and actors, and it's a little crazy sometimes because in the comic situation, you have a day-to-day basis with everybody. I speak to my comics once a week, twice a week, sometimes people 3 times, or at least there's emails being exchanged on a regular basis. When it comes to the actors and submitting the actors for projects and to get them on TV shows, you have to hope that there's parts in the breakdowns for you to be able to submit them on. Otherwise, you could have clients that you don't speak to for 3 months, and it's not for lack of trying to submit them. It's just like, hey, in the last 3 projects or the last two weeks of projects, there wasn't one submission I could make on you because it was, the way that they classified the role, the age range of the role, the specific project of the role. And so you lose, touch a little bit more with your actors, which I hate because I really like the people that I've chosen to work with. And, I think one casting director or somebody had written, I read a blog in terms of that. I'm bouncing between comics and actors, but it's still basically under the management umbrella that, that one time she had gotten like 7,000 submissions for one role, and she had to narrow the invites down to 100. Now, put it in this perspective. You were in LA, you got a million actors in LA, you got a million actors in New York. You have agents and managers, and we're all vying for that one role on Elsbeth. Okay. So if you think of how many people are submitting for like that one role that you dug up, and maybe for weeks and weeks, there's no roles for anybody under 30. And then all of a sudden there's that one role for somebody that's early 20s. And you can only imagine how much competition there is just to get the audition. And then
Oh
you're
yeah.
excited to get that. And then then you have to wait for the next step to hope you get a call back or they book you.
And now because there's so many, it's not like when I was in LA, you'd walk into the casting agent, but
Right.
now it's all on video. So
Right.
they get so many more submissions. Before, you only see so many people. Like, you go into, wherever in LA or New York, you go to the agency, you got 35 people. They see that. Now, I mean, it must be hard for a manager because you're sending in this video, but you also know every other manager's sending this video. So it goes to the talent pool, as you said. It's built up so much that it's. I mean, people don't get it. It's hard to be an actor right now. It is really hard to be an actor.
Yeah, and you get and again, like I said, there's so many parts, and then so many of these shows that are shot in New York because I'm on the East Coast, and I watch all of them. And you got your Law and Orders, you got your FBI's, you got your Elsbeth, anything like Will Trent and things that are shot in Atlanta are fair game for both coasts. But there's another trend that I you see to have happen is it must be a local hire, and the same thing applies in LA. Like, they're not going to fly on a sitcom that's 22 minutes. They're not flying somebody to be the waitress, okay, out to LA for the one part, nor are they flying them to New York unless it's a cameo or unless it's a stunt, that they're trying to do. And but for the most part, I think that there's a lot being shot on both coasts. Now, again, Vancouver and Atlanta are fair game because they'll fly people. But I've noticed that there's so many local hires in LA, and the same with on the East Coast. In the proximity, and they don't want to fly anybody back and forth, especially if they do have to put somebody up for a few days. And all the budgets are tight. I don't believe that they're that they have the kind of money for projects unless they're so big at this particular point, that are so big where they can afford to blow up cars, blow up buildings, and blow up things so that they don't care if they fly somebody somewhere. What's that? That's absolutely nothing. But for the most part, again, I saw a couple of them today looking for local hires. And local hire, there's a lot being shot in New Jersey now. There's a lot being shot in upstate New York. There will be a lot in the summertime as the weather changes, things being shot on Long Island. There's a lot being shot in Pittsburgh. Believe it or not, there's a lot of things that are shot in Pittsburgh. So, again, and sometimes people in New York aren't considered local hires because of the rules, the SAG and AFTRA rules. So you have to be so many miles of distance from that city to be considered a local hire. So unless you have like somebody, a relative or somebody that you can put down as an address in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia or Western Jersey, there's so many rules and regulations now at this particular point. But, in terms, and back to the manager thing, I think a manager is a person that has to do everything that has to do to move the act forward when you don't have the help of an agent. So you kind of take on all the roles and you do everything. You have to do everything. Like, in other words, people say, oh, well, you got to get an agent. Well, I had to wait for an agent to book a client. And I didn't have an agent to book a client. How is the client going to live? How are they going to make money? Who's going to try to pursue work for them? There's a little bit of a little question as to where the line begins and the line ends as far as the two go. But, I think ever since COVID, everything is survival. Everybody survives. The agents have to,
everything's changed.
Yes, the agents that take in clients, like you said they look at the guy, he wanted to raise a family. I happen to be very family oriented. Okay, there are acts with me that the kids, they were infants when they were kids, and now they're out of college. They're kids. Okay, but I've understood, and I think anybody that that's worked with me like that, that's a family person, knows that hey, you got to live and you got a family. I'm not taking a family away from anybody. That's the most important thing, and that's the thing that's going to keep you going in the long run, is to have that family. And I understand the importance of that, and I understand the importance of personal time. But ironically, it's always Murphy's Law. When you finally get the audition, somebody's not going to be, I'm going to be out of the country, I can't do that. Or it was funny. You were in LA, so we used to have people going back and forth to LA, and they all used to go out to LA for pilot season, if you remember. So people, I forget the names of the hotels and places that you could rent for a month.
There was a place in Burbank, and they did a documentary about it, and they changed the names now. It's like but it was legendary because you would go there and it would be like rock stars who would stay there, or it would be young actors or a whole bunch of good looking people there for pilot season. But you're right. They would stay there for basically 2 months and they get charged out the ass. The rent would be insupportable. And they would have some people I saw this documentary, they would come like every year, like the stage mom and her son, and they would like spend everything they had, and the kid never got a pilot. And you
never got a pilot, let alone sometimes you don't get an audition. And the thing I was going to say to you, it's like the minute any of our acts were coming back home after being there for 2 months without an audition, what do you think happens? There's that phone call. Oh, geez, I can't believe you're leaving tomorrow. They wanted to see you. And, then changing airline tickets and things like that cost a fortune back then. It wasn't like, that you were just going to drop everything. And you got to learn, too, that nowadays you just can't fly there for any particular, I'll be a local hire in LA. Really? For the scale, for SAG scale, you're going to be a local hire in LA. And you might even get cut. Okay? So, there's all those things, but there's so much Murphy's Law that's involved, with the acting thing, or it's, it really is crazy. I've seen it so many times where somebody does not become available. But, basically with some of my clients, I pretty much know, they keep me informed. Okay. Hey, I'm bringing my daughter back to college. Okay. This weekend. Well, my daughter's graduating this weekend. It all goes on the calendar. Okay. And I keep an eye on that. And I go, okay, I just had one who you're going to probably have next week, or is it this week on the Wednesday? Once his kids were out of college and they both graduated and they're all working, he's decided to do more cruise work, and he does a lot of the cruise work. Never did cruises before. It wasn't the time. Wanted to be home with the family. Totally respected that. We worked through all that. We got parts on TV shows. We got parts in movies. He always worked. There was a little more bountiful for work, for the one night of work, pre-COVID. But, all those guys survived, and now they're doing, they're on the boats. They knew how to make it work, and they're making money. And they're making more of a living now, to wonder how did you make a living before? But they did it. And, that's the important thing. You really have to just understand and respect the fact. It's a little bit different for the manager. For the agent, if they get artists and things, or if they do bring somebody in, they're at the end of the year, the company on a different level looks at like, well, how much did this client bring in? How much did you? And in some of the big agencies, even if an artist brought in 100,000 in commissions or 50,000 in commissions, it wasn't enough. So they were gone. So you'd say, well, geez, I'm a small company. If they brought in 50 or 100,000, I'd be really happy. I'm fine with that, because, you build, and then you never know what the next level, the next step for that artist that was bringing in 50 or 100,000. Maybe they jump to 200,000 the next year, but the tolerance level and the patience of the companies, they just move on. They'll just move on. I don't give up on people unless people tell me they're done, or unless people say, hey, I want to split, I want to try something else, or I want to leave. But I don't quit on my people, no matter what happens on the actor side or the comedy side. I will until I'm told I'm done. I'm told I'm done, I'm not done. Now let me ask you this. You've been doing it. Omnipop's been around for a while, but I don't know many people as when you were a kid. I'm sure you didn't say I'm going to become a manager. I mean, I always wonder what's the path for management. I know sometimes some people do. They see it. They go. They listen to music and they go, "Holy crap, that artist is great. I could do something with this." And somehow they go into the record company. What was your path? Because you've been with Omnipop for a long time, but it's just like you just didn't suddenly wake up one day and have Omnipop. So what I knew
when you were a kid, what did you
knew in college, when I was in college, my senior year in college, because I worked in a coffee house that I helped built at the college. not physically, but built, and I established and handled all the entertainment that was booked in there. I knew that I needed to be in show business in some capacity because I wasn't really that good of a guitar player. I was a good front man. Okay. And I knew my limitations, which is what the important thing of being a lead singer is. Don't sing that song because you're going to suck, but sing this song and people are going to think you're great. So I had done all that and I had immediately got hired. I talked them into hiring me. They had to, because in the college town that I was living or worked in or I went to, by the time I graduated college, I was exclusively booking 5 clubs.
What college was it?
My college was St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Okay. So I ended up
home of Rolling Rock.
Yes, not anymore, but that's exactly where the Rolling Rock was, in Latrobe. And I stayed in Pittsburgh for 5 years. I found a band that I really, really like because I'm originally from Long Island. They were young, and they listened to everything I said, and we made money. We ran it like a complete business. And I said, we're not gonna make it any further. There's a lot of Pittsburgh acts that are really getting big, that have record labels. I think we got to bust out. We got to go to New York. So I took the band to New York. I got to write. This is other than being able to perform, because I didn't, which I would have wanted to, because I played all through college and in high school in bands and in coffee houses, but I didn't perform with them. I managed them, but I was able to co-produce and co-write and write songs for the band. And we did have 3 albums out. Okay. We got shelved on the 3rd one, which I knew would have been the best, but there's reasons for that. That's a longer story. That's another story, but it wasn't anything we specifically did. It's just the independent networks went under, and the major label, which we were supposed to go to, which was MCA, was going to take us on. But then when the independents all folded, MCA, all these people at that time, this is how old I am, they would go, okay, you want us to push Thrills, or you want to push Barry Manilow or Melissa Manchester? Or we're going to push this band, or these guys are not going to get pushed. We can put them on the label. The record company can pay for all the records they want, but we're not going to get pushed. And that's unfortunately what happened to us. So nobody really got to hear the 3rd record, but we had momentum from the 2nd album. And we did get on P1 radio stations and things like that, but it still was not enough to go. So yes, I was in the music business. My vehicle, which my band ended up breaking up, and I was still booking local bands, and we were going to the NACA conferences, these college conferences, and we saw that comedy was starting to become a big thing. And we go, oh, well, we can book comedy. And I ended up being the booker of Eastside Comedy Club in Huntington, Long Island. I got it after Rick Messina. I had it for many, many years. I learned all I could learn by hanging out there, by hanging at top of the town in Huntington. I literally was in a comedy club every single night of the week looking at comics and picking comics and then picking out comics to say we wanted on our roster. And we did very well. I think we were one of the top 3 college agencies in the country at the time. And we're talking about the kind of dates we were doing with the people we had working for us. I think one year we did 1,500 dates. Now that's for a small agency. That was a lot of dates for colleges. And we had 35 people on the roster, probably another 35 that were still on our roster, even though they weren't on the roster poster. They were on the roster because we were booking so many dates. And then things changed again. Like something changed, and all of a sudden people were getting on TV. Comedy was in the boom back then, and you remember this in the 80s. People could not literally, and you couldn't see it on YouTube. There was no internet or anything, so you just couldn't. I mean, my East Side Comedy Club that I booked, I used to worry when my friends would say, "Hey, can you get me in? Can you get me some tickets?" I go, "No, man, we're open Tuesday through Sunday. You can't even get a ticket for the club." Okay,
it was crazy. Like I used to work out like both the Comedy Works and the Comedy Factory outlet in Philadelphia.
Okay,
I remember one time Clay here, if the outlet went to, and now given the Comedy Works was right across the street, and Clay went to 2 shows on a Friday, 3 on a Saturday. The Works went to 2 and 2. And then everyone forgets Andy Scarpati had about 15 clubs in the suburbs, which were close, and everything was packed. I mean, I remember we worked the door at the outlet so we could get better stage time. We got we get the good open mic, we get the good time. And whoever worked the phone, he would be like, just take reservations for over 200 more because so many don't show up. But reservations, we'd be
They
selling
knew the
out.
percentage, right? They knew how many were going to show up. And then
Yeah.
you'd have a line out the street, which made it even more like, we got to get in here earlier next time.
Yeah. And I can imagine
really,
for you, I mean, a Tuesday through, Sunday, I mean, that's like, the weeknights, I mean, in the Philadelphia area, the weeknights were all the shitty one-nighters, you go, but you still got paid and you'd be going to or you go up to North Jersey to Betty's Fireside or all these
well,
crap
Connecticut
balls.
was huge too. There was a club Monday through Sunday. This guy Booker, maybe you remember him, John Schuler, had all these clubs in Connecticut, and he used to mail you a booklet, and it showed the directions and the thing. Okay, but see, back then when comedy was in the boom, even a bar took it seriously. They threw people out. They made sure the blenders weren't running in the bar when they had a lot of respect for it. And then when the numbers and everything started to fall off, when people were starting to find different things to do, of course, everything runs its cycle. Plus, you may remember this or not. Andy Scarpati's office was a one phone call for me. I think once I'm going to toot my own horn. I was literally the first person to take over comics. Okay. And this is what I'm going to tell you, and I'll mention names and things like that. We were booking some of the guys so much in colleges. I begged them not to take this work because there were some bookers that would just say, okay, just get on the interstate and drive north and I'll tell you where you're going. Okay. When I'll tell you what exit to get off all the way up to Rochester. Okay. There was one booker that would do that. Then there was another thing. I go, how do you know how much you're making? He goes, you don't know till the week of. I said, well, what position are you in? Okay, you don't know till the week of. And I go, well, then how is that a good thing when I can book you in a college for one night and you make more money than the whole thing? So what I was doing when I took them over, I was doing the avoidance of having to call a booker like Andy Scarpati and say, hey, Andy, I got to take so-and-so out of the club this weekend because he got 3 times the amount of money to go to a college. So once they let me do that, and I'll tell you a couple of the names of the guys, my first ones, once I took that over, I was able to navigate the two. Okay, I got no colleges here, so I'm going to go do the club this week. I know when the downsides were, and I know when the colleges were going to book heavy. And probably the first act I ever had was John Bazaar. Okay, John Bazaar was my first act. He was one of our biggest college acts. And I said, John, why don't you just let me book all your dates? Because you don't know. I'm not in communication. Again, there was no internet. There was no texting.
Right.
You had to get somebody on the phone and you had to hope they listened to their answering machine. Okay. So it was a lot easier for me to handle the schedule. And they call in once and say, well, where am I going? Well, I got off the phone with Andy Scarpati today. I booked you in like 5 of his clubs. Here's the weekend dates. You are closing. Okay. And, and we'd work it like that. But then I got colleges for you on these other dates. Okay. Just tell me where I'm going. So when you coordinated that, it became easy. So I had John Bazaar, then I had Steve O, then I had Joe DeLion. Then I had Jim Myers, who was Klaus Myers.
It's funny, real quick about Jim Myers. And I know him, I'd worked with him a few times at the outlet. But I was in LA and I was at this crappy bar called the Powerhouse. And it was like you would get a mix of drag queens, metal guys. I used to run into Jim Brewer there. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting there and it was Klaus. And you remember him because he had that look and that laugh. And I still remember he still was bullshitting me. He'd always bullshit you just to
always bullshit you. Always tell you stories.
Yeah, but it was so funny because he was doing a show at like right next door, like the little Stella Adler Theater. But it was so funny to see him, and I had not seen him since I think I worked for him at the open forum at the Comedy Factory outlet. But I still remember that I ran into him like out of nowhere. I'd not seen him in like 20 years, but it was, and then he went on Facebook as like Mookie Barker.
Mookie
But
Barker, yeah.
but yeah, but it's funny because I knew he was with you. And Bizarre, I remember Bizarre would do the rap. He would do the rap before any comics that he would
Oh
close with
yeah,
that
he was doing the rap. He had
rap.
brought the
It would
jukebox,
kill.
brought the big
It would
jukebox
kill.
in, and also Scott Bruce was with me because then we went out as a team. It was Bruce and Bizarre. Okay, Melvin George is still with me. He was from that era with those guys. Dan Wilson is still with me from that era. Billy Garron is still with me from that era. Buddy Fitzpatrick just came a little bit later from that era, but he's with me. My newer guys are like, Joey Callahan's a little bit newer with me, but he's been with me, so Callahan's been with me 10 years. It's hard to, we lost 2 years for COVID. So
Right.
you forget your time, because we used to Zoom or we used to call each other and stuff that 2 years was really, that was a bummer. That was a bummer for friendships and things like that. So we all stayed in touch, and I came out of COVID with the same people, and I was lucky, and I'm still very close to all those people I just mentioned, but those guys were all working the Philly clubs. They were all working for Andy Scarpati used to just give me the dates. Richie Minervini used to be with me too, because I was booking his club, but I had the club before I took on Richie. He gave me the club. Okay. And, we brought a lot of people. Long Island was kind of famous at that time. We had the Jackie Martlings came out of there. So many of the people. Rosie O'Donnell came out of there. Bob Nelson got big out of there. I used to, people, this too. People used to drive really far just to pick up $100 or $90. I had people in there. I was talking to Jay Leno when I booked him at a couple of colleges, and he remembers being at East Side Comedy Club. He would drive to East Side. Who else? Bob Nelson. Guys would come from Boston and everything just to work these clubs and pick up $50 because they wanted it. It was a real club. And East Side
Right.
Comedy Club was one of the first paying comedy clubs where they actually paid comics to perform. The other places, even some of the other ones on Long Island, the comics wanted to get on stage so they could get the stage time. They knew that they had to fine tune and their craft, so they did whatever they could. But East Side was one of the first paying comedy clubs, in the country. So it was that's a little interesting history there. Richie knows a lot of that. He can tell you a lot of that. But when we moved into the bigger room, I brought in a lot of the LA people: Charlie Fleischer, Robert Schimmel, Amazing Jonathan, Rich Jenny. We had all these people first in our big room, and I exposed them all to Long Island, and we built them up quite nicely. And I enjoyed booking the room. Okay, the booking, it's not like you throw the three best people together, because that's not always the best combo. I really, sometimes some of the people that do give me shows to book, they go, "Did you do it yet? Did you do it yet?" No, I'm still thinking about it. I said, I got to hear it in my head, because these are one-nighters, and they pay pretty well. So the people deserve like the best I can put together. And as long as I can hear it in my head, okay, this guy is going to go into this guy and it's going to be great, and this guy's going to finish it off. So, it's not just about finding three people that are open or three good people. It's a matter of finding the three right people. And
that's important. It's important.
Yep.
You always want to do that. But now I got a question for you. You mentioned all those names, like John Bizarre was one of your first clients. Back then, what drew you to a client? Like, there were so many comics back then. And, they had a lot of different temperament. It was a different time. There's a lot of partying. It was just the late 80s, early 90s was nuts. But what would draw you to a comic? Was there a certain characteristic, a quality? Would you take on someone who you knew wasn't an A+ act, but he was an A+ person? I mean, how did you book in those early days? How did you find your talent? And do you think you had a good eye for it?
I think I did, because we did very well with all those people that I mentioned to you. That question has been asked of me a lot. It's kind of weird. I haven't been asked it that much lately, but when I would do seminars and certain things, people would ask me like what you look for. And I go, well, I walk in not looking for anybody, but if I see it, I want it. Okay. I can't answer it. I can't answer that question. You just have when I saw John Bazaar, we were supposed to go see this other guy who was closing the show. I'm not going to tell you who that was, but I will tell you the host of the show was John Bazaar. Immediately after the set, I went out to the room and got John Bazaar. Okay. I didn't brush off because I was with somebody else and they took care of that situation. But as soon as Bazaar got off that stage, I was on him like, I go, I don't know what it was. He just got me, and I couldn't stop laughing. And, we then the rest for us was history. We started him in colleges. And ironically enough, at the time too, the other act on that show was Al Romero. And I don't know if remember Al Romero, but I loved Al Romero too. So I stayed in touch. John, I wanted right away. And then I liked Al Romero. Not so much for the headliner, who was very good. But to me, I knew that the other two, in particular, John, was going to work for me. Can I tell you what that was? I don't know. I'm with a client now who, this is the youngest one that I have that I've been with for a while. I went to a showcase for one of my other clients. Nobody showed up except for her fiance and somebody else. And I saw this young girl in the middle. Okay. And I got to talk to this person. I really have to have this comic. But out of respect to my other one, I waited for a little bit because I wasn't really there to see the other people. And, and this was pre-COVID, probably 2 years pre-COVID. I don't know what year to put that in, because you lose, all your clients have to respect the fact that we all lost those 2 years during COVID. So I couldn't do anything. Your hands were tied. You couldn't do anything for the person. They couldn't do anything for themselves except maybe write. They couldn't even perform in front of somebody. So I've been with this person for a while. We ended up going to Montreal. We did 2 Tonight shows. Okay. And now she's got a lot of other things on the horizon now, but it's my youngest client. And it's the only young client that I have. Okay. Because for me, I have to succeed with her. It's important to me. And I don't want to, I'm not saying I won't take on another client, but I've been with this one. Most of my roster I've been with for at least 7 years. Then it gets into the 30 or 40 years that I've been with the same people. And they're still working and they're still going strong. So I ended up with Julia Scotti not too well, how many years ago? That was pre-COVID too. I started with Julia because she was being managed by Kathy Caldwell. And Kathy wanted to get out of the business. And I go, well, this is great. This works for me, and then Julie and I have been together ever since, so again, I literally now have 13 comics on my roster. That's all I can handle. I don't want any more than that.
Okay. I want to,
I don't have to be greedy either. I don't have to be greedy.
I want to take you back. You're managing comics. Okay. Now, when do you decide to start managing actors? When does that come into play?
Well, this happened. That's good. That's a good question, because what had happened was we had comics that we had gotten deals for and pilots for, based on, at the time, the only TV show that you could do comedy wise was the MTV half-hour comedy hour. I think that was legitimately the first one. So I had a lot of people on that particular show. And one of the comics that we started to represent, he had a great set. He was terrific. Somebody from ABC was in a hotel room getting ready to go out. He turned on the TV, and this person was on the TV, and, he thought he was hysterical, and he had to reach out and contact him. And that person did 2 pilots for us, and actually did 3 pilots for us. One actually got picked up. The other 2 for ABC did not get picked up, but needless to say, I still think they were great. So what was happening at the time, I think you'll remember this, Ray Romano was seen, and Ray got the show, Everybody Loves Raymond. So what happened was casting directors and people were frequenting the clubs in New York City all the time. They were looking for the next Ray Romano. But unfortunately, what happened, Ray was lucky. He was natural. He was, he had instincts. Seinfeld was lucky because of the people he was surrounded with, so they were lucky, but but casting directors and networks were going to comedy clubs. And even in Montreal, when they had all those shows and everything up there, we weren't talking about like the assistants or the casting assistant or associate going to these things. The head of the departments was going to Montreal to look for people. And they did find people. And they did. But I think in the long run, in looking at comics always didn't understand that the person that the casting director or the producer or somebody that wants to do the pilot with you sees up there is the person they want. They don't want you trying to be an actor all of a sudden. They want you to be that persona that you emulate when you're doing your stand-up performance. And see, some comics, probably what started to happen was some of them all tried to act. Okay. And they weren't trained. So in essence, they really couldn't act. And they weren't being themselves because they were trying to be somebody else they thought they were supposed to be. Okay. And forgetting that the person saw on that stage as doing stand-up that's the persona that they wanted for this role. Okay. And Ray was lucky because all the stuff was written for him. They're his words. They wrote very well for Ray. Okay. And I think we had transitioned because it was just a natural thing that happened. And basically, so we had a couple of comics that got very, very lucky and they did well, okay, with it. And, one of them's very famous now, and the other one was pretty famous, the one that they saw from MTV and got the 2 pilots. And I think what happened after that, we started after the comedy thing, and when people weren't looking at the comics as much as they did, we kind of fell into the, improvisational actors or the comedic actors, because there were a lot of actors that were very good at comedy. So when we first started out, we didn't go for any comics that were legit or theatrical. We were looking for actors that had comedy chops. And that was what we were looking for. And so that's what we transitioned in after the comics were kind of used up, and some of them just weren't going to be actors. And they were fine because they were all making good money and they were doing comedy and they enjoyed it. So, we kind of transitioned into that.
Now, when did you start to decide to open the LA branch? It's funny because I know I had from your clients in LA, my other show, Cooper Talk, it must have been 11 years ago. I also had Regan Burns and I had Doug Jones. Yeah. And I had
he's still with this.
Jess.
Who else?
And Doug Jones and Jess, the woman Jess who worked for you guys. She did the PR.
Oh yeah, Jess. Yes, yeah. Jess still does the PR for us.
Yeah, she got me them, and it's funny because Doug. It's funny. I remember I had Doug and Stu. I had 2 guests that day. One was Doug, and one was Matt Eisman, who now runs as a host of American Ninja. And they're both like, Matt's like 6'3", and Doug's like 6'5", and I'm like 5'10". And my pictures next to him, I look completely dwarfed because they're so big, and Doug is so skinny, they look taller. So Doug was with your LA, and Oscar Nunez was with you guys in LA.
Yeah.
When did you decide to open an LA office? Was it something that you were excited about, or did you just feel that business dictated you opening another office?
Well, I think the business dictated it. It was about 1992, when Bruce went out there because he was single. He didn't have any Long Island attachments anymore. And it was hard at first. And he went out there and we got lucky. My music partner that was out there had a place where the studio was, and we got office space from him. And Bruce was able to establish that and build that. At the time, and I don't know if you were there, when all our guys used to filter through there. So Steve and John and everybody, they used to stay in that hotel where they stayed with somebody, or sometimes they'd even stay with Bruce. During pilot season, he'd be able to open up a little bit for 1 or 2 of the guys. never much more than that. And then the other ones would get the hotel because it was a little tough living together with guys, in an apartment.
Right.
So, and you're trying to stay out there for 2 or 3 weeks. But there was also, because we had all of those guys and they were all East Coast comics, there was a one-nighter circuit. And Bruce used to do really, really well with that, and our one-nighter guys used to really kill. I mean, you'd have John Bizarre and Steve O, they'd kill. And then all of a sudden he got them into the Ice House and places like that, where they also would kill. Okay. And so, it was a matter of the fact that it was sort of inevitable, because even when that one person for the MTV with the ABC, got that, there was always somebody to be out there. Okay. So I didn't have to go back and forth, and Bruce didn't have to, when they were coming east, I could cover everything. And when they were going west, he would cover everything. So that was sort of how that worked. You just knew you were going to have to do it. And it would have, at one time, it might have ended up being both of us out there. But at that point, at this particular point, New York is still one of the best places for comedy. The strongest comics are going to come, they're still coming out of New York. Okay. In fact, some of the comics are moving back to New York from LA. So, it's an interesting thing. But as far as the showbiz aspect of it, it's okay to have the presence. Is it as necessary as it was then? Now as it was then? Well, from a television standpoint, as we said, there's a lot of local hires. There's not a lot of network deals. If there were network deals and somebody was on a sitcom, you'd fly back and forth, if you had to, and, like if you really got to hold somebody's hand or do it, then you do it, because that's what you signed up for. But I think, again, people have to understand, too, that things change so much. And that 2 years of COVID changed things so much that I don't know, are there there's not really there's not meetings, there's those things that used to happen. I had one of my people who was was big recurring on Search Party. Okay. And when she went out to LA, she was out there, and within the last minute of the last week, tells me she's going to be out there. I was literally able to have her meet with every network and every studio, and I got the meetings within a week, within the same week. It's not that easy to do anymore, and because so many people will send me the tape, send me a clip, so the world has gotten to the point where that's what they want to see, as opposed to actually, obviously if they're going to lay out some big money, they're going to want to meet you in person. Okay. They're not going to do that without the in-person meet, where shows are given. But, I think there's a need for an East Coast and a West Coast, but they don't necessarily have to be together.
Now, I was going to ask you. You mentioned how she was going out meeting after meeting. Well, when you have these actors, and they're much different than comics, because comics, a lot of times you're used to having a shitty show. How do you prepare an actor for the rejection? Because people don't know, there is so much rejection. I mean, salesmen complain. You know what? I know guys who had a TV series and then they haven't worked for a year. Okay. I mean, their career is dead, and they're thinking, what's wrong with me? Do I smell? Like I don't. So do you, as a manager, take that to prepare them for the rejection, or to console them, or is that just too much for you?
It hurt. No, I'm not afraid to face it, head on, because I know that that's part of the territory. That's part of the job. I'm not afraid to tell somebody. I have my own way of breaking it to them. Okay. But it's not like, I think they've learned, and LA will, this is a thing where you may have done a series. Say you did a series or you did a pilot. Now, the week of the upfronts, you get a call from Fox NBC, hey, will so-and-so be available to be in New York on Monday? Okay. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to get picked up, right? You think you're going to get picked up. And they don't give a shit whether they, okay, it doesn't matter. They don't care whether they have to pay a first class ticket and a hotel room because it's their series, it's for the advertisers or whatever the case may be. And they're making this big announcement. So it doesn't matter to them whether they buy a first class ticket on Sunday. Okay. They're not looking to get a deal on a ticket and book it in advance. Well, you know how the actor knows that they didn't get picked up? They don't get a phone call on Sunday to say, here's your ticket. Okay. Nobody calls you. They don't tell you anymore. No news is bad news. Okay. Like in a comic performance, if you don't hear any news, the comic did well. Okay. If you hear news, it's a bad thing. In the other end of the business for television, if you don't hear, that's the news.
Right.
So nobody really breaks it. I know that one of our guys did a pilot with somebody who ended up being, another guy that been kind of famous. And I forget what network it was for. And he kept calling. And it got so mad. He got so heated at the person that he ended up having to send chocolate, cigars, flowers, because the show didn't get picked up. Okay. But he was so upset and, that they didn't tell him, or they wouldn't tell him. And you would think, like, the guy's kind of famous. Like, you would tell him that he's not picked up, right? No, they don't tell you. They just don't tell you. So, when we're doing these things and my clients do send in an audition, if they don't hear from me within a week or two, they know it's dead. So most of my people know to do the audition, we submit the tape, and they just let it go. You have to. They just have to let it go. You can talk to any of them. They go, I just do it. I send it to you. I send it in and we let it go. I even let it go. And then if I get noticed, then I'm excited. Like, hey, we'd like to pin that person. Now they got they have to they can't say we'd like to hold that person because that sounds like it's a booking. So now they say we can pin that person. So, they got terminology so nobody gets themselves jammed up and say, well, you said this was a good thing. You wanted to hold that person, and you holding that person, then I'm not doing anything else, so they don't, all the, the terminology, the description of the kind of actors that they're looking for. I sometimes have to Google what they wrote. I go, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? I'm Googling, they come up with all these terms and things. I think it's changing a little bit right now. I don't think they're doing that because I thought that, a little bit of the breakdowns and things lost a little bit of reality, because sometimes you have to look at the part and say, well, this person could be that part. You don't have to break it down like that for me. Must be able to play male. Really? I didn't.
Right.
I thought the guy's name was John. Like, must be able to play female. Okay, seriously. I didn't get her. Her name is Carol. Okay, you think I don't know the difference between the names? Okay, but those are just funny things that started to happen. I got a kick out of it, but everything seems to be a little more straightforward now.
Now, was there ever a big deal that fell through and it really stung you? Like, I mean, you roll with it. You're dealing with your clients. Was there anything that you went, fuck, that should have been mine? I mean, is there anything like just you remember that sat there and you just were pissed? Because I think everyone has one of those projects.
Well, when you're in LA, when you're doing, I was very attached to the comics that had the pilots. One of them we did for CBS. Andrew Kennedy was in it. Rita Moreno played his mother, for God's sake. Kristen Miller played his wife from, Drew Carey. Who else was in it? John Ratzenberger was in it. Julia Duffy was in it. Your guy's the least known in it, but he carries his weight in the show because they picked him because he was a comic. And then you find out that they don't pick it up, and they pick up 3 other CBS shows that were only on the air for 3 episodes. And they could have had this, but I don't think I was the only one that year. Like you do when you do a pilot and you shoot that pilot and you got it in the can and you look at it and you're trying to be objective and you go, this is good. This will build, because every first episode of something has to set up the show. Okay, so if you feel that it was good and you can connect to the characters, then it goes on. Okay, so then you got to give it a chance to breathe and to grow. And like that one stung for me. That one, and I felt bad for my client. But you know what? I think the rest of them felt bad. I think John Ratzenberger felt bad. I think everybody in the cast felt bad. Rita Moreno felt bad. Okay. Of course, they were still famous and they could get ongoing roles. And my guy was still like going like, wow, what did we do wrong? I don't know. CBS wanted to pick up these two other shows because they had certain people in it. And, so they wanted to pick up that one, and maybe that one had more celebrities than we had. And we had more celebrities. Everybody in the show was basically a star, and my guy would have been a star. That breaks your heart. How do you handle it? You just wake up the next day and you do it again. It's like they say to somebody, you write something and you get rejected, and you say to your publicist or, your person, you go like, well, what am I going to do now? And he goes, well, you're going to get a pen and pencil and you're going to write again. You're going to write another book. You're going to write another play. You're going to write another story. It's like you bomb one night and I said, well, these 4 jokes didn't work. So what are you going to do? You're going to go do 4 more new jokes the next night. You're not going to quit, so you don't quit. So I think the whole business, I think anybody that's in it, that's still in it or that gets it past the first couple of years or 5 years, 6 years, I think they're thick-skinned enough to say, I want to do this and I'm going to keep doing this. And if I'm making a living and I'm making people laugh, then I'm going to keep doing it. I don't have to be famous. I don't have to be famous. I don't have to be a millionaire. I just have to be able to pay my bills and continue to do what I like.
Now do you, because everyone talks about business and show business, and I always think a lot of people like you, and I have a friend of mine's a drummer for a very big country star, and he does motivational speaking and he has drumsticks. It's an entrepreneurial spirit. Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur? Because you've really built something. You took over a market that as you said, no one was really doing booking the East Side. You started paying people. Then you
East Side, then you paid him, and then I was but taking over comics. And I didn't know anybody else. Then all of a sudden I had my little roster of people. Then the next thing I know, other people that were in the business, they started taking over people. I was going like, well, you guys are copying me, but it was working. It was working for me. I mean, I had my ledger books like I have now, with the routing sheets and everything. And I had, there was John Bazaar under B, and then Steve O under O, Melvin George under G, Billy Garrett, and, like all those guys. I had legitimate calendars for them, and I kept their calendar better than they did because they weren't going to get double booked. Okay. And they weren't going to miss a date. So, it's it's a crazy thing. I don't know if I consider myself an entrepreneur. I think that was just something that I did because it made sense for me to do it. It's not like I thought about, let me think about it. No, I didn't put too much thought into it. I said, you know what? When the minute I was told how you guys were booked as comics, where you didn't know the position you were in, you didn't know how much money you were making, I go, okay, well, this is not going to work. I'm not going to turn down a $1,500 college gig so you can do a weekend, which you don't even know how much you're getting. Right. So I just thought that was a natural thing. I don't think it was one of those things where I go, I got like a light bulb comes on,
right.
I don't think it was one of that. I just think that, are we millionaires doing what we did for as long as we did? Are we comfortable? I would say we're probably comfortable. We never, had the big score, like somebody did. But, at the end of the day, I like what I do for the people that I do it for. And I think that's all, that's all I can say about that. I mean, yeah, did I wish some of those pilots got picked up? And I wish we had a series that went to syndication. Okay, because the syndication money's a whole nother level. We were close on one client. Okay. One client was close. I forget how many episodes we were legitimately away, or the 4th season or something we didn't get. And that would have been a big deal for the company. And then I don't know if that would have happened, what the course of the company would have been, at that point. Like, it's hard to say. When people have life changes or things change in their life, it changes their direction. That one syndication thing would have been a really big thing for us. And I don't know, whether I would have ended up in LA more, end up in LA less, sleeping on Bruce's couch more. I don't, like, you get to the point, or maybe at that point I would have been able to afford my own hotel room. Okay.
Right.
So you just don't know. All I know is that I try to keep the comics doing the same thing. I have no regrets that my third album got shelved. Oh yeah, I do. Do I have regrets? Yeah, it hurts me because from a nostalgic standpoint, I go back and listen to the third album and the second album, and I go like, oh man, if we just got just a chance, but we didn't. And, the only thing for me from a music standpoint is that when my band broke up, that was my vehicle. Those were the guys I knew how to interpret me bringing the songs to them. So once I lost them, I wasn't good enough to carry it myself. So I stopped writing. I mean, I've got books and things with papers and things where I still haven't stopped writing, but I have stopped writing. So, and that breaks my heart. I wish I would have done more of that. But I don't look back. I just remember the good times, and I remember some of the songs, and I got them on record, and I can still listen to them. So again, I don't look at anything. I'm not bitter. With the guys that didn't make it, I wish I would have made it because I really did believe in them. And we got them to a level. We did get them to a place where you got the chance. Okay. But then after that, it's out of your control. So with the comics, I just had this discussion with somebody. Listen, if you're making a living, you're paying your bills, and you're doing what you like to do, like go out there and make people laugh, and the opportunity and the work is still there for you to do it, where you can make that living, then why be bitter doing something that you really like to do? Would you be rather doing DoorDash? Would you rather be emptying, putting up sheetrock? You can literally go out there and make people laugh and make a living for doing it. So yeah, do we all want to be famous? Who doesn't? Everybody wanted to be famous. Everybody can't be famous. It doesn't mean you don't strive to still be famous. Okay, because that gives you your drive. But for the most part, it shouldn't make you bitter.
I have one more question for you. Okay. Looking back at your life, and this could be professional or personal, when you look back, what makes you proud? And lots of people don't want to say what makes them. What are you proud of in your life?
Oh, in my life personally?
Or professional, both.
Personally and professionally, I'm proud of the fact that I've always given everybody my all. If I tell them I'm going to do something, I do it. If I didn't do it, I'm not afraid to tell them I didn't. I wouldn't be afraid to tell them if I fucked up. I've never fucked up a booking. Okay, so just so you know that. If maybe a follow through or something where you forgot to get in touch with somebody, or you didn't do it in a timely fashion, I would come clean and tell them to do that. I think but I am proud of the fact that I've always done everything I said I would do for everybody that I work for. And the other thing I'm proud of is that, like, from the integrity, is that one, I know how to keep my mouth shut when my client talks to me. I'm a vault. If somebody talks to me and they need me to talk, it's not going to go any further than me unless you told somebody. And the fact that I think from an integrity standpoint, I've never owed anybody a penny, and everybody's always gotten every penny and everything that they've deserved with no questions asked. They've never, my guys have signed over power of attorney to me, which I take very, very seriously. And I don't sign anything without them knowing. I can't buy a car for them, but I can sign a contract for them. Okay. I can't go in, and do certain things, but I can approve their photographs, and I can sign their contracts for them after they've approved the date, so that the paper doesn't have to go, a million different ways, because some of them won't take care of it in a timely fashion. But that's what I think. I think the integrity and the honesty is the thing that I'm proud of the most. And I think that a lot of my guys, they don't question anything that I do. And if they did, it would be okay because I would just be they'd be asking me a question about something, not an attack, and say, why is this like this or why is like that. They don't question when the money exchanges hands and it goes through me. I can account for every penny over the years, all the time. And we've actually had to fire people because they didn't have that integrity. And it cost us because they were probably some of the best people we have. But I'm not letting a crook into my ranks. Because people will always figure out how to be a crook, no matter what they do. They will try to do it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot one thing I wanted to ask you. Where did the name Omnipop come from?
I have no idea. Bruce came up with that like in 1980 something, 88, and I don't know. But since Omnipop, there's a lot of things. There was an album by what the heck was her name? I can't think of her name, but there's an album called Omnipop, and I like the album too. I own the album, but I like the artist, and I can't think of her name right now. And then I don't know, but those all happened later. He just came up with this thing because we were doing bands, and Omni meant everything, or a lot of different things. So I think he's the person you'd have to ask for that. I don't know. We just, at this particular point, you keep it because it's a lot harder to change that name after 45 years.
Right.
So we both share the name, but we're different people and we're different coasts, which is fine. I mean, you evolve, and I think a lot of people were always impressed, even up until the point where there was a little more autonomy between the two offices. I think people were impressed that we were together so long because there's nobody that lasted that long. Even went into our 30th year, 35 years, nobody was together that long. You can look at any of these businesses or any of these agencies or management companies, they haven't been together that long, So, but that question, I think it was one day he described it as like, well, there was pop with the music, and then it was Omni everything, and everything. So that's kind of
now
where
there's
it was.
Omnipop.
Yeah, I don't really know.
I'll ask for
okay. I now remember the name of the album by Sam Phillips. That's who it was. Sam Phillips was the artist, and she was also in. She played a killer in a big movie, but she had no speaking lines. But I can't remember the movie. But I do remember it was Sam Phillips because I have other CDs by her, so that's not really important.
I want to thank you for coming on, man. People, go find Omnipop online, and when you see the comics and they're playing in your area, go see them because the roster. You can go on their website. They have the East Coast and they have West Coast, and it's a big setup so you can see.
But we have all our management. Let me say one thing on that. We do put all our management clients in the East Coast. I've split it, but we do have all our management clients. So where you see like a lot of multiple people on pages, they're not all stand-ups. So that because most companies will put all their artists on their roster. It's up for you to say, well, that one's the comic, or this one's this one's an actor, right, or this one's a musician. So we did that. I split it a little more because I do a little more booking for the guys on the East Coast. So I do have a section where it's the whole page is everybody, and then there's below it says our stand-up, our available stand-up. So I split it so the people, because sometimes some of the actors get confused and go like, how many people do you handle? I go, no, they're not. Some are comics. I probably have an equal number of comics as I do an equal number of actors. So people, that's it.
Look for that, but go look for the comics. Also, people, go to YouTube and follow Jimmy Corhan, who's a great producer. Follow Comedy Trainwreck. My show's been on. We've had some great guests. We've had Rich Scheidner. We've had my friends from Homicide on the Street, Reed Diamond and Kyle Secor. We've had Steve Scroban. We've had some great guests. Wendy Liebman, a dear friend of mine. Go listen to those episodes if you do comedy. Follow this podcast, Coop's Comedy Corner. Also, they have a Coleman Green show, Talking Shit. They have Ed McGonigal, and Jimmy's got a bunch of other shows. Also, go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find over 1,038 episodes. The latest one I posted was Stan Lynch, Tom Petty's former drummer. We talked for an hour. He has a new band coming out. It's great. And if you're into the business world, look up the Coop Tank on YouTube. It's my weekly business show. I moderate 3 local business people. We talk about motivation, inspiration, and all that stuff. So that's about it. Look up Omnipop. I want to thank Tom and Ingegno. And he got a great client list, and he's been doing it forever. This guy's been around. Follow Omnipop. And thank you, Jimmy Coran. And people, I'll talk to you next time. Good night.
Coop's Comedy Corner.